We would like to welcome all the participants. This is part of the CLP conferences, which are held monthly or fortnightly, it depends. And this is a special one. It intends to celebrate the Day of Africa, which is tomorrow, and to connect present African conflict with an institution which was relevant in late African history. It is the Special Committee on the Situation with regard to the implementation of the Declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples. Shortly, the Special Committee on Decolonization, or even shortly, C24. This is a committee of the United Nations General Assembly, which was created in 1961. So we commemorate this year, it's 60 years. Its predecessor was the Committee of the Six, which was integrated by the Kingdom of Morocco, and whose report stated that the principles abiding colonial states to transmit information under Article 73 of the United Charters, which was an issue raised especially by the Portuguese government, denial of it possessed non-autonomous territories. Based on that report, in 1960, the General Assembly passed a resolution 1514, also known as the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples. This declaration stated that all peoples had the right to self-determination and that immediate steps should be taken to end colonialism unconditionally. With us to evaluate the role of this committee and especially to discuss the oldest African colonial conflict of today's, we have three invited speakers, and I will ask my colleague to present them to the public and to make a short abstract of the very simple rules we established for this debate.
So thank you, Professor Maciel, for this introduction. The webinar today will be composed by three speakers, as already said. Professor Maharia Monen, University Professor and President of APCT Mohamed M. Ahmed Gain, who is representing the Moroccan Embassy, and Mrs. Senia Bashir Abderrahman, who is a refugee and activist from Western Sahara. Each speaker will receive 3 questions and has a maximum of 5 minutes to answer each of them. In your screen, you can see the timer. Of the total of 9 questions posed by the organizers and the responses of the speakers, the event will have the time for question and answers. We ask the public to forward only questions rather than comments and opinions so that we can profit the most from the presence of our guests. So our first guest and speaker today is Professor Maharia Monene. He's a professor of history and international relations at the United States International University in Nairobi. Professor Monene is recognized as a public intellectual, a resource person in Kenya. He is recognized as a United Nations expert on decolonization. He is also rated among the top 100 CCTV4 commentator in the world. He appears in Kenya and global media and public forums as an observer and analyst. He's also a newspaper weekly columnist. Thank you so much, Professor Vanene. I will start with the first question. On the 10th December 2010, the General Assembly proclaimed the decade 2010-2020 as the third decade for the eradication of colonialism in his resolution 65/119. What assessment must be made of this proclamation and of the 2 previous ones, considering that the situation of the territories considered now 14 remains unchanged?
Thank you. The fact that the situation has not changed very much shows the adamance of the occupying powers or the supposedly responsible colonial powers not willing to heed the demands of the United Nations. So it implies that the struggle continues, and we have situations where sometimes the issue mutates from one position to another. And we also note the ingenuity of the invasion. In some places is a question of occupation. In others, is aborted decolonization, as in the case of Western Sahara. It is also a question of the invasion and aggression. Other places you have the changes in claims such that some areas no longer are portrayed as dependent or colonized places. They start claiming that they actually are different from what people used to know them to be. And you have a situation like the Falklands or the Gibraltar, where we have had discussions of people claiming they are Gibraltarians and not British or Spanish. And you have in the case of Falklands, people say they are Falklanders, but no, not Argentinians or British. So this is a mutation of the whole thing, which tends to create new dynamics that need to be examined. So in general, the occupying powers or the responsible powers have not been very willing to go along to meet their obligations in terms of decolonization. And for them, some of them, they claim that it's a strategic issue for their long-term interest. And if it is a geostrategic issue, a geopolitical issue, a defense issue, then they are not willing to entertain very much unless they control the whole thing. So when that happens to be the case, we don't make very much progress towards the decolonization, although the committee, the United Nations have made it very clear that they should be moving that direction. The willingness on the part of the colonizing power or the occupying power to change is very difficult. And one of the things that has turned out to be part of the obstacles is that some of the occupying countries are not alone in this. They are supported by very powerful countries for their other interests. So in that case, one would expect that some of the major countries involved would be on the side of decolonization. And then it turns out, no, they are not on that side because they think the status quo as it is more in their interest than actual decolonization. In this case, actually, Western Sahara fits that scenario very well, that the major powers do not think that they should be encouraging decolonization or de-aggression of the place. Major powers in this case, you can talk about the United States and France being part of that problem because they think Western Sahara is better that way for their interests as opposed to it being properly decolonized. The colonial power in this case is still Spain, and Spain has shown unwillingness or inability to behave as it should to fulfill the mandate of the United Nations as it was required to do. So in general, that is the general picture that I can see. Thank you.
No sound. No sound, Isabel.
Hello?
Ok, estava sem som. No sound.
Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, did
Thank
you hear me?
Yes, thank you so much. You addressed already a great part of the issue. However, our second question is, how do you assess the role of the Special Committee on Decolonization, C24, in the decolonizations that have so far been achieved from 1961 until now?
Well, to a large extent, it's been successful. To a large extent, there are those remaining areas. From the time of the 1960 proclamation, the Year of Africa, in which the United Nations did proclaim that this should be done, and probably with all deliberate speed, if there is such a thing, to see that as a concept and as an imperial practice, colonialism is a thing of the past. And in fact, one of the problems arising out of colonialism was that it was racially based. And so, as much as colonialism was a racial thing, and then remove that racial angle and the political racial connotations, so that particular people stop being ruled by some external forces outside. And we know that colonization in itself was a denial of legitimacy, a denial of sovereignty to a particular people. In fact, it was dehumanizing to turn people into non-humans so that they can be mistreated. That was colonialism. And so when the UN said that should end, it was essentially restore humanity to the colonized people, restore their sense of legitimacy, restore their sense of sovereignty. And if that is done, then the world will be moving in a better direction than it was at the time. To a large extent, one would say the committee has been successful in many places. It's only that there are those areas that would, in those days, sometimes it appeared as if they are remote and as if they were not part of the picture. Once the big ones were dealt with, then attention had to turn to the remaining ones, the ones that tended to be ignored. And in some instances, these are the ones that experience multiple colonialism. And multiple colonialism implies or means that the people there denied their rights, not just by one country or one occupying power, but many of them. So they have the experience of colonialism with this particular country, and then another one comes in, or sometimes they are shared among different powers. So now, since they tended to be small territories, sometimes they tend to be ignored or to be subsumed within the big ones. And when they're subsumed within the big ones, then they tended to be out of the picture. What the committee, the number 4, has tried to do is to bring the forgotten into the public arena, into the international arena, and say these are also challenges of colonialism and therefore needing decolonization and the attention of the United Nations as a whole and not just a part. Now, that in itself has become problematic because there are those countries or people who do not think or believe that those should be considered when it comes to the issue of decolonization, by sometimes claiming, no, these are not colonies, they are just an extension or extensions of the home country, or they are so strategic, so important to the survival of the particular or security of a particular country, there is no need of discussing that because some countries are so powerful, they ignore what the world opinion may be, and they get away with it because they are powerful. So in that case, then we will have this element of might, muscles, being the determinants of what supposedly should happen. Although that should not be the case because there is a moral force, and this thing has to be brought to their attention all the time, regularly, until it sinks in. Because if it doesn't sink in, then you become pessimistic and lose hope. And I don't think it's necessary to lose hope. There's still hope that it can be done.
Isabel, no sound.
Sorry. As Professor Monen said, the committee highlights the cases that are not so public and sometimes forgotten, which is also the case of Western Sahara. And in particular, in this case, since it's the last colony of Africa, what are the current standings of the C-24 and what measures are to be taken considering the current war after the ceasefire in November 2020?
Well, in the case of Western Sahara, the responsible colonial power is Spain. Although it failed in its obligation initially, it can do or follow the example of the United Kingdom, what the United Kingdom did in the case of Rhodesia. So when there was that UDI in Rhodesia, and with Ian Smith, and Britain had pretended or behaved as if it was not responsible, but it did come to its senses and then resume its role as a colonial power and then engage in decolonization. That's how Zimbabwe or Rhodesia became Zimbabwe. The colonial power had to take charge of its colonialism because it's the one that had done that. And once it did that, then go through the process of fulfilling the United Nations requirement of decolonization. The same thing, Spain as the responsible colonial power can maybe take the same route and then do it. But of course, in doing so, it has to deal with the reality. And the reality is that Morocco has occupied or invaded Western Sahara and tried to make it, to create new realities on the ground by being there with might force, and then claim that that's part of it's part of Morocco. And so now there is that struggle that may come up between Spain, if it is willing, and Morocco, the occupying force. There was a time when it was possible to talk about Morocco as the new colonial power in Western Sahara. And for that purpose, it almost made sense. So one could talk about multiple colonialism in Western Sahara if Morocco was the new colonial power. But the reality in hindsight, that is not the case. The case is Spain is still the colonial power and Morocco is the occupying power trying to annex the place. And the unfortunate thing in this, it seems to be fully supported by France and the United States, and maybe some other countries, either for strategic reasons, because they consider Morocco to be strategic to their interests, and therefore they don't want to annoy Morocco in order to have access to whatever Morocco may have, or because they are stealing the fish and not just the fish, but also the phosphate and the fertilizer, the rich natural wealth along the coast and in Western Sahara itself. So if they are busy taking those things out and they don't want to have to account for them. And if they don't have to account for, in case Western Sahara takes full control of itself, and we hope that it does in a future which is not too far, then it will be able to determine its own future, its own interests, its own relations with its neighbors, like Morocco, because it's a neighbor, and the far off countries like those in Europe, and actually taking the resources from the place. So you have these multiple problems. Spain, Morocco, the occupying power, which sometimes is the aggressor. And then you have the United States, which seems to be reevaluating itself in a lot of things. And we hope it reevaluates its policy towards Western Sahara and that area. I hope President Biden will reflect better policy than has been before. And France, which has some sort of problems when it comes to Africa, trying to think through what may be the best interest of Africa, because it's only the French. So those things have to be dealt with in order to deal with the question of Western Sahara.
Thank you so much for your insight, and I will pass the word to Professor Messiel to introduce our next guest speaker.
Thank you, Isabel. Our next speaker is Professor Mohamed Kane. He's a well-known professor of the University of Ibn Tufayl of the region of Khabar Saleh in Morocco. He has been appointed by His Excellency the Ambassador of Morocco in Lisbon, and we would like you to answer in the same conditions of our predecessor invited to the following three questions. The first one is like this. Morocco was part of the Committee of the Six, whose report was attached to the 1960 resolution 1514 about the independence of colonial peoples and countries. Point 4 of this declaration states that all violence of any kind against non-autonomous people must be halted immediately. And point 5 states that non-autonomous people must be able to freely express their will. Is Morocco, which was one of the co-writers of this declaration, still supports the declaration and its attached report?
Thank you very much. Pleased to be with you today here. I am Mohamed Ahmed again. Of course, I am a Moroccan Sahrawi, born and raised in the Sahara, working as a university professor, as you said, and the president of a think tank. First, I would like to highlight a very important point. I am here participating in my personal capacity as a professor and not in any case in the name of any official institution here in Morocco. A professor.
Sorry to interrupt you, Professor, but you are here appointed by the Moroccan embassy in Lisbon because
Could you please spend the time before your comment?
very direct. They said Mr. Ambassador will be replaced by you.
I am. Could you please reverse the timer?
Yes, of course.
Just a remark. Could you please restart the timer so that I can benefit from my full time slot?
Of course, no, don't worry about the time. Go ahead.
Okay. Again, I am speaking here in my personal capacity. I'm not speaking in the name of any official governmental institution here in Morocco. What I want to say in the beginning, also participating in an academic debate and not to reproduce any propagandistic speeches. And I'm afraid I am outnumbered here, and seeing, of course, Isabel Lorenzo, for whom I read many articles. Hopefully I'm not outnumbered, because embracing wholeheartedly Polisario's and Algeria's stance, dealing in a selective manner with the UN General Assembly resolutions, is not a good thing to do in this context. As you know, individual General Assembly resolutions and advisory opinions are not binding. They are having a recommendatory nature. This cherry picking made by the Polisario and Algeria is in fact intended to disseminate what I would call an erroneous interpretation of the right to self-determination principle by wrongfully linking it to an exclusive sole referendum mechanism, which is not true. They use, Polisario and Algeria use, for instance, some chapters from some resolutions, and they deliberately ignore others. They also try to exclude other very important prevailing principles in international law, and this cherry picking blurs the reality regarding the Sahara regional dispute. We should ask a question: what is our background here? What is our reference? Our reference should be international law and the UN resolutions. There is no mention, as my brother from Kenya stated, against any reality in the UN. There is no mention of occupation nor of invasion. There is no mention of the last colony of Africa, as Mrs. Lorenzo stated. My brother from Kenya stated that there are new realities on the ground, and he's a university professor. How could you talk about a ground you have never been visited? You're a professor. How could you talk about a book you have never read? I want to highlight some very, very important points regarding decolonization. Morocco has gone through a gradual decolonization process. The Sahara conflict is in fact the only question which continues to be the subject of discussions and resolutions of the Fourth Committee, while the Security Council has been seized of it since 1988. This double examination of the question of the Moroccan Sahara is simply anachronistic, and here I am making reference to international law and to the UN Charter. The Article 12 of the UN Charter stipulates that, beginning of the quote, as long as the Security Council fulfills with regard to any dispute or situation whatever the functions assigned to it by the Charter, the General Assembly must not make any recommendation on the dispute or situation. This is, of course, self-explanatory. I will highlight some arguments, however, that undermine the very basis, the very thesis of Algeria and the Polisario. The objective of the founding fathers of the UN through Article 12, I mentioned before, are three. First is to prevent a situation where two UN bodies take up the same question. Second is to avoid the adoption of contradictory decisions, as it is currently the case with the resolution of the Fourth Committee on the Sahara and that of the Security Council on the political process. And third, to guarantee the preponderance and preeminence of the Security Council, which is the source of international law, because its resolutions are binding, while the resolutions of the General Assembly are not binding, but they are rather recommendatory. So the Security Council is the source of international law and remains the main UN organ in charge of maintaining peace and international security. When Morocco first introduced the issue of the Sahara to the UN Decolonization Committee in 1963, Polisario did not exist. Polisario was created only in 1973 by Algeria with the sole aim, of course, of thwarting the completion of Morocco's territorial integrity and advancing its geostrategic interests in the context of its hegemonic agenda. On the other hand, the UN considers Polisario only as a petitioner. I participated in the Fourth Committee as a petitioner, and Mohammed Ammar, who is introducing himself here as a representative of the Polisario, participated under the same title, like me, a university professor. We had the same time slot before the UN Fourth Committee. So just like the dozens, of course, of many petitioners from the Sahara civil society, Polisario has never been recognized as a national liberation movement. And I ask Mohammed Ammar here, you are not, of course, entitled to the rights that other representatives of other non-civil governing territories are entitled to. You are carrying an Algerian diplomatic passport like all the Algerian Polisario leaders, and you do not have a credential document from the UN as a sole legitimate representative of Sahrawis? How could you present yourself as a representative of Sahrawis in the UN? Sorry, sir. So, and this is a question addressed to you.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Last point, sir. Algeria has been providing the Polisario with military, political, diplomatic, and financial technical support. Ever since,
Professor,
yes.
we've just outreached the time with interruption. You will have opportunity to explain your further views.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just to remind you that this is not. We are not in the chronometric time, so I have some time to tell you this. This is an important issue. You are speaking on your free opinion, of course, as everyone else, but the institution that appointed you was the Moroccan embassy, and we must be clear about the criteria which we use to invite people. We invited Sania Bashir because she was appointed by the Sad Republic. We invited Professor Muan Macharia because he's a researcher and well-known researcher, as Isabel Lorenzo told you. And we invited you because you were appointed by the Moroccan embassy. This is to make clear the origin of our invitations. Now, the second question is like this. The Moroccan Kingdom has made it clear that even with all the concessions made since 1991 by the Polisario Front and the United Nations, it has no intention to uphold the referendum established by the ceasefire agreement. What is the current proposal of the Kingdom of Morocco in order for the Sahrawi people to get self-determination?
My opinion, again, in my personal capacity as a university professor, not speaking of any governmental position or institution, that there is an indeterminate nature of the right to self-determination. There is no single UN resolution from the bulky UN literature that provides clear guidance on the precise method by which a certain choice of a political status is to be made. I challenge the view of the person who is speaking here in the name of Polisario. I challenge your view to give me only one reference from international law. Please remember my question, madam. Give me one reference from international law stipulating that the right to self-determination goes necessarily and only through a referendum. There is no reference from the huge international law arsenals that provides for particular application of the right to self-determination. We should consider the fact that international legal bodies, even the court, the European Court of Justice, have never taken a position on whether a referendum was legally required as opposed to other possible methods of implementation of the right to self-determination. Now, this is what we are witnessing now is a UN political process that is a negotiated solution, political solution. They don't talk about any referendum mechanism because this belongs to the past, because it proves inapplicable. You're talking about concessions. What do you mean, sir, by concessions? Algeria, I mean the concessions made by Algeria and the Polisario Front. Do you mean their proposal to divide the Sahara territory? I refer you here to the UN Secretary General report in 2002 saying, beginning of the quote, Algeria and the Polisario Front would be willing to consider or negotiate a possible division of the territory. It doesn't make a reference at this time, since the Moroccan government does not wish to discuss such an approach, end of the quote. Is this the concessions you are talking about, sir? This lays bare the real aims of Algeria. How could they talk about the division of the Sahara territory? How could they talk about the right to self-determination while they undermine all these principles by proposing the division of the Sahara territory? It's not about principles, sir, but about geopolitics that nurture instability. Morocco's consistent position is very clear. There is a UN process led by the Security Council looking for a political, pragmatic, peaceful, and durable solution. the conflict is bilateral. And this proposal made by Algeria by the Algerian president in 2002 and adhered to by Polisario proves that it is a bilateral conflict between Algeria and Morocco. The proposal to divide justifies and provides conclusive evidence that we are in front of a regional dispute. Now, you should consider the fact that from an international law point of view, there is a primacy of territorial integrity over the right to self-determination. The importance of the principle of territorial integrity is laid out in many different legal texts, which you ignore in your questions, including Article 2 of the UN Charter. In this regard, the resolution 1514 stipulates that without any cherry picking here, it stipulates any attempt to partially or totally destroy the national unity and territorial integrity of a country is incompatible with the purposes and the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Very briefly, territorial autonomy proposed by Morocco is a power-sharing arrangement whereby a state delegates the management of local affairs to local and regional institutions while preserving its territorial integrity and national unity. As the third path between integration into the state and independence, it is a way of respecting cultural specificities of a given population within the borders of a state. The question here, has it been considered as a plausible solution for territorial conflicts in the world? Yes, of course. Several territorial disputes have been settled by means of territorial autonomy arrangements, notably between Finland and Sweden in the case of the Åland Islands, in the case, of course, of Aceh Island in Indonesia, and in the case of Darfur in Sudan. So autonomy is in fact the most modern expression of the right to self-determination because it makes it possible to reconcile respect for the higher standard of the territorial integrity of states with the essentially indeterminate nature of the right to self-determination. What Morocco proposes brings as a solution is very simple, simply put here. The kingdom presented in 2007 its initiative for the negotiation of an autonomy.
Professor, and now your time is over. Thank you very much for your reply. We'll come back to these issues probably during the debate. I'm going to ask for the third question. What does the Kingdom of Morocco intend to do now, considering the ongoing war with the Sahrawi Republic?
This question, does it make reference to the United Nations again? The spokesperson of the UN Secretary General says that we don't or seen any war in the territory. I am Sahrawi, my family is there, and I know the situation more than all of you here. The Polisario has used social media to air fake news, and I refer you here, and I can provide you with all the references using videos from Yemen war and elsewhere to say that there is a war in the Sahara. In the Sahara, there is no war. People are leading peaceful lives, and of course, living within a context where institutional performance proves really able to deliver on the ground, be it through the elected representatives who are participating in the UN-led process representing legitimately the local population. Let's allow me to summarize the thing in one very important key word, that is the free will. We have in the Sahara here, South Morocco, people leading their lives with the free will to choose for who speaks for them. And my question here, and I was expecting Mohammed Ammar to participate, but this is not the first time that happens to me. I was invited 3 years by the Lisbon Institute of Political Studies in the Lisbon University, and Abbi Bushraya, who is so-called representative of the Polisario in Europe, was supposed to be there. When I came to Lisbon, I didn't see him. They sent someone else to speak in the name of the Polisario. When I asked the director, where is the Polisario representative? He said he didn't come. I said, why? He said, because you are here. You know why? Because the Polisario wants to just introduce to the world that there is a binary opposition between Morocco and Sahrawis. while the reality is there is a binary opposition between the separatist idea and the unionist idea. The unionist idea, there are thousands of Sahrawis who embrace this unionist idea, and I am one among thousands of these Sahrawis. While in the camps, we don't know who is in the camps, since the Polisario refuses still the census demanded by the UN Security Council, while there is no right to the camp's population to participate in a very simple democratic practice, that is elections, to choose who speaks for them. We have the same leadership introducing themselves for 5 decades, being the sole legitimate representative. To deconstruct this title, there is no such a naming. How could we accept a sole representatives for 5 decades? A legitimate representative, from where they draw their legitimacy? You know, sir, you don't know, sir, that this leadership is involved in gross violations of human rights in the camps. Who is saying this? I refer you to Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, the UN Human Rights Committee, France Liberty, and I can provide you, Isabella Lorenzo, with all the references that may help you change your mind and see the reality differently. The UN Human Rights Committee has issued a recommendation in 2018 addressed to Algeria, saying that there is a de facto devolution of the jurisdictional authority from Algeria that is responsible to the Polisario, a non-state group, to exert an authority that is illegal from an international law point of view. And this jurisdictional authority is the cover-up for all these gross violations of human rights in these secret detention centers in the camps. Very briefly, to conclude, Brahim Ghali now is summoned to appear before the National Court, the Spanish National Court of Justice, for gross violations, genocide, rape, torture, in the 1st of June. I call on you all to follow his case. How could he be legitimate representative while he is involved in raping Sahrawis, in killing Sahrawis, in secret detention centers? And again, not me saying this. France Liberty has a very bulky report about these gross violations of human rights. So please, let's think, let's try to judge this from a scientific point of view. There are a lot of distorted things being aired by the Polisario members, and this is not surprising to me, because, you know, they are defending a geopolitical agenda, of course, led and sponsored by Algeria. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, go ahead. Well, no sound.
Thank you very much. I heard it. Thank you very much. And I hope there will be some questions from the house here.
Yes, we shall have questions in the second part of the debate. Now I'm going to...
we are going to now for our last guest speaker, and we will have questions and answer time afterwards. I hope that our next guest speaker will focus on the questions that are posed, actually. The first question is, what assessment does the Sadr do about the role played by the UN after 1991? So this question is for Mrs. Senia Bashir Abderrahman. She's a refugee, and she lives in the refugee camps, an activist from Western Sahara. For nearly 2 decades, she has been advocating for the freedom and the right to self-determination of her people, as well as exposing the brutal and oppressive occupation of Morocco of their homeland. Senia's expertise range from political advocacy, African Union policy formation to health research and social development. She is particularly passionate about refugee matters and advancing youth and women's agenda in Africa. So, good morning, good afternoon, Senia. What assessment does the Sadr do about the role played by the UN after 1991?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to join you today during this important session. And As Professor Monene has highlighted, it's absolutely fitting that we're talking today because tomorrow marks the Africa Day, or the 25th of May, and the day on 1963 when African revolutionary leaders decided to establish their own body and tell the world that enough is enough of oppression by colonial powers and liberate their continent from the claws of colonialism and apartheid. But of course, this noble and important goal has not been fully achieved, and that's particularly true for my country today, Western Sahara, which is still colonized and occupied. He also highlighted that the UN is the international body mandated with ensuring and maintaining peace and security around the world. But you will all agree that you have seen with the recent aggression by Israel in the occupied territories of Palestine, that the UN has failed so many regions around the globe and their people. And one of these regions happened to be Sahrawi Republic and its own people, the Sahrawis. Currently, Western Sahara, as a case of decolonization, is naturally before the UN Committee on Decolonization, or the UN Fourth Committee, as well as the UN Security Council. And although both Sahrawis officials and civil society representatives, including myself, have used the Fourth Committee as a platform to highlight our right to freedom and independence and share our stories with the delegates, the committee has done very little to push for real change and substantive steps in the decolonization and the completion of decolonization of Western Sahara. So as Sahrawis, we believe that the UN, the international community at large, have failed us. They have lied to us consistently. They have ignored us. They have denied our right to self-defense and independence since 1991. And even though the UN continues to be tasked and is obliged to protect and safeguard the Sahrawi people's rights, inalienable right to self-determination, as Professor Monene has indicated, since 1991. But the fact of the matter is this case has been important much earlier than 1991. And it has, Western Sahara as a colony has been in the UN's list of non-self-governing territories for as long as the OAU and the AU have existed. So to me, we cannot really talk about the UN's role without really highlighting Africa's role in the process that has led to the actual ceasefire in 1991. And Sahrawi Republic, as a member of the Organization of African Unity, only agreed to the joint OAU UN settlement plan because it was confident that an African-led proposal and process would put the Sahrawis' right at the center of any step to implement it. And it's, as you all know, it was based on this plan that the UN Security Council established the MINURSO, the UN mission for referendum in Western Sahara. As its name suggests, it was mandated to organize a fair and free referendum on self-determination. But that has, for the people of Western Sahara. But of course, and you have guessed it right, the UN and its Security Council have not honored that process and has at every step of the way failed the Sahrawi people. So Sahrawi Republic and its legitimate representative at the UN, the Polisario Front, did what must be done and has for many years warned the UN and other international actors that it will reconsider its involvement in the UN process because it essentially has not implemented what was meant to do, which is ensure that Sahrawi people decide their fate on of self-determination through fair and transparent referendum, as is the case with all colonies. And since we will celebrate Africa's wish to unite and galvanize together to get rid of colonialism tomorrow, I hope that we will be able to see that reality reach to Western Sahara as well very soon. So to me, we cannot with right conscience continue to allow the maintaining of status quo in Western Sahara as is it's a decolonization. It needs to be completed today and once for all. And international community cannot be silent in the face of occupation, colonialism, and repression by Morocco. It really is a shame that we're talking about this today on 2021.
No sound, Isabel.
Okay, we have a technical problem. Carla, you have to let me unmute. So thank you, Seina. What assessment does the SADR do about the role play, the main obstacles for the implementation of the 99 agreement? So we heard what Professor Ahmed Gain said, but in your opinion, what are the main obstacles to this agreement and to the leading to the referendum?
So the agreement, the ceasefire agreement was done with the precondition of holding, as I said, a referendum on self-determination, where the Sahrawi people, the indigenous population of Western Sahara, would decide whether they want to be independent or integrated into colonial power. And that's a right and a promise that was given to the Sahrawi people way before Morocco occupied Western Sahara. It was given to them when they were still Spanish colony. And it's because Spain failed to decolonize Western Sahara and give us that legitimate right that all our neighbors enjoyed in Africa. Now that unfulfilled promise has continued. And now that we have an occupation with an occupying force, which is Morocco, of parts of Sahrawi Republic. And it's ironic because the settlement plan of 1991, which was the basis for establishing the MINURSO, was in fact agreed upon by a negotiation and mediation that was done by an ad hoc committee of African heads of states. And King Hassan II stood before African leaders in Nairobi summit and promised them that he will honor a referendum of the people of Western Sahara where they will choose. And of course, like Morocco has done, King Hassan II never honored that promise. His son now continued to deny that promise. Morocco instead has used this opportunity of so-called peace, which is really not peace, since 1991 and 3 decades to basically strengthen its settler presence in the occupied territories of Western Sahara. It has used this time to commit crimes against humanity, targeting Sahrawi civilians by arresting them, torturing them, imprisoning them, and many of them have simply disappeared. And I don't need to go very far in telling you where you can find those issues or those documentation of human rights violations, because they're there, and the African Union Commission on Human and People's Rights has been denied to investigate those crimes since 2012. Morocco has not allowed it to go and conduct its fact-finding mission in the occupied territories of Sahrawi Republic, because Morocco knows has a lot to hide. And so Morocco, again, has used these 3 decades also to plunder and steal our natural resources and finance its systematic violations of human rights against innocent Sahrawi civilians in the occupied territories. Morocco has also tried to use this period, UN-sponsored, must I say, period, to try and erase any memory of the Sahrawi struggle by hoping that the new generation of Sahrawis will forget about their cause, and that somehow the time that will pass will allow the Morocco to sort of strengthen its occupation. But everyone sees through that it's a false strategy deployed by Morocco, and it has not gained its objective. Today, Morocco is the only obstacle to implementing the 1991 ceasefire agreement, because they don't honor any agreement that they sign. And the only reason why they are the main obstacle is because they have a lot to lose if a referendum is held. They have a lot to lose because they will lose territory, rich and natural resources. They have a lot to lose because the world will see once and for all the realities of the Moroccan oppressive regime. And like Professor Mounene has said, it's really unfortunate that Morocco is doing all of this and committing all of these crimes with the support, explicit support of European allies like France and even Spain, but also the US, of course. And Morocco prides itself to be supported and assisted by Israel. And that was evident through its normalization agreement with Israel this past year in December 2020. And so I don't have to go very far because usually we have the saying that tell me your friends and I can tell you who you are. So Morocco's friends are Israel, the US, which is responsible for supporting very dictatorial regimes. And also it's supported by many authoritarian African leaders who have denied their citizens' own rights and continue to oppress them and silence them. And Morocco has learned from those dictatorial leaders and implemented those strategies in the occupied territories of Western Sahara. So we must hold Morocco accountable to make sure that it's no longer the stone on the road.
Isabel, no sounds.
Thank you, Senya. So the last question, what does the Sadr expected as outcome of the ongoing war is more or less answered. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, certainly. I don't think I even touched upon what we expect from the current second liberation war in Western Sahara. So as Sahrawis, we have chosen to defend ourselves against all colonial presence, including when Spain was the colonial power of Western Sahara for almost 100 years. We used our legitimate right to defend ourselves against the colonial presence, like was the case with Algeria and many other colonies across Africa. And we still hold that right very dear to our hearts, because you cannot allow someone to just come and attack you in your house and say, please go ahead and beat me and torture me and imprison me and steal my house, settle in it, and claim that it's okay and justifiable. So for us, the peace process in Western Sahara has failed and has been put on hold for almost 3 decades. And that has led our people to lose faith on the international community and the UN and their commitment to ensuring that everyone around the world, without discrimination, enjoys peace, prosperity, and independence. And I think the Sahrawi people, just as much as anyone in Portugal or in South Africa or in DRC or in Thailand or in Argentina, all are human beings who should have the right to decide their fate and should be able to do so in a way that's consistent with international law. And that's exactly what Sahrawis are asking for. And so as Sahrawis, we have for many years called on Sahrawi Republic leadership and to use all legitimate means to defend ourselves against this aggressive and brutal occupying force of our homeland. And so the second liberation war that has been taking place since the 13th of November of 2020, which was, I must say, imposed on us by the Moroccan occupying forces when they attacked civilians in El Gargarat in south western Sahara. Sahrawi Republic, with now the current liberation war, believes that there is no way we can go back to business as usual. There is no way we can allow Morocco to continue to get away with committing crimes against Sahrawis in the occupied territories. Sahrawi Republic would, of course, like to engage in a peaceful process that would allow us to achieve a referendum of self-determination, but we cannot be trapped again like we were in the 1991 ceasefire. We ideally would agree on some sort of truce, but we cannot go back to the same old terms. That it's time, this time there must be some sort of genuine commitment to honor the implementation of a referendum of self-determination for the people of Western Sahara. We need concrete actions, steps with timelines to achieve this goal. And only then will we engage in some sort of talk or mediation to achieve a truce or to pause the war, because our right to defend ourselves, our right to take up armed struggle will always be there as long as we are occupied country. We also want to make sure that Morocco, as the occupying power, meets its obligations and commitments as it has promised for many years and continues to revise those commitments. And of course, Sahrawi Republic, given that Morocco is now a member of the African Union after leaving the organization for 34 years, this should serve as an opportunity to fully give the appropriate role of the African Union, given that these two member states are involved, two of its own member states, which are two equal member states. And African Union's Agenda 2063, its flagship project of silencing the guns, the solemn declaration of the OAU 50th anniversary in 2013, all stress that there is no way we can allow to bequeath the burden of conflict to the next generation of Africans. So for us, this is an African problem that should and can only be resolved by involving Africa fully. We cannot continue to have this colonial Western powers imposing solutions on issues that clearly are not understood by them. And the occupation of Western Sahara is one concrete example.
Thank you so much, Senia. I'm sorry, your time is up. And we have already several people who want to comment or question. I ask most of our guests that have already reached out to participate to pose questions or comments, but as short as possible and directed to our speakers, so that we can profit the most from their presence here. So the first...
well, let me just add two more useful informations, which is the invited speakers can speak up to 5 minutes. They are not obliged to fulfill the 5 minutes quota. If they have direct answers, they can make it as short as possible. And the second important information is that the invited speakers may address each other. And of course, to reply, we'll follow the same rules. Thank you. Go ahead.
So the first speaker will be Dr. Sidi Omar. He's the legal representative of Frente Polisario at the United Nations in New York. I think he's muted. Carla?
Carla?
Carla, could you please unmute Sidi Omar?
Carla, tem que ligar o som do Sidi Omar.
Can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and my greetings to your guest. I'll be very short. I just heard some inaccuracies by the colleague from Morocco, being a professor. He claims, and a claim made by Morocco, that it was Morocco that put the Western Sahara on the UN agenda. this is not true. It was Spain in 1955, after being admitted to the UN, that had to work for that issue to be admitted on the list of non-self-governing territory. But it's true, and this will be part of my question to the professor, that on the 20th of August 1960, Morocco officially put Mauritania on the UN agenda because it considered Mauritania as part of Morocco. So my question would be for him to explain to us, this is, by the way, on the record, that Morocco put the Western Sahara on the UN agenda, as I said, is not true. I refer your guest from Morocco and all your viewers to the session of the fourth committee held on the 9th of December, 1963. 9th of December, 1963, when Morocco's delegate opposed the inclusion of Western Sahara on the list of non-self-governing territory, which was, of course, the year in which the question was included. So very simply, what your guest has said has no basis whatsoever. Morocco wanted to include Mauritania on the list, and a session of the General Assembly was actually held on what's called the problem of Mauritania. But when Mauritania became member of the UN and Morocco's claims were proven baseless, then Morocco started claiming that it has put the Western Sahara issue on the UN agenda, which is not true. Very briefly, your guest is asking where's the referendum and the UN doctrine. I just refer him to General Assembly Resolution 1514 and 1541. I think everybody, even the beginners in international relations, understand what Resolution 1514 means when it comes to decolonization. So I refer your guest to major resolutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have three other guests.
I think it's better to let Professor Mohammed reply to this question.
Yes, I was going to propose that since we have four other participants who want to talk, that we address each question individually and not at the end. So the word is now with Professor Gain.
Carla, thank you. Desativar o som.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know whether Mohammed Ammar here is a speaker, why he is no more a speaker. I don't know why he tries to, participate as a questioner, although he is on the agenda as a speaker like me, because I asked him some questions that he is supposed to answer, not to distract our attention from the main theme, that is the Sahara conflict. The decolonization fourth committee, treating the Sahara conflict is, as I said, anachronistic. This goes against the founding texts of the United Nations. Please, let's agree upon our reference. If we refer to international law, then there are a few things to take into account. If we are just producing politicized speeches, then I am afraid this academic body will be instrumentalized for political purposes. The terminology we are using has no existence at all, nor in international law, nor in the UN texts, resolutions. Could you please give me one text from the UN speaking about the Sadr, this self-proclaimed republic? Could you please give me one text from the UN speaking about the last colony? And I want here to reflect on what my sister Sinia has said. Yes, true, I agree with you. Telling me who are your friends, I tell you who you are. Of course, who are Polisario's friends? Algeria, Venezuela. These undemocratic regimes. And you say that why Morocco is being supported by democratic world, France, Spain, the United States, all these countries, Belgium, all these countries support a UN Security Council process. There is no talk anymore of a referendum.
Sorry, Professor, sorry to interrupt you, but you are not replying to Dr. Sidi Omar's objections about the 1963 statement.
I said it's very clear. We are not to talk here about any case other than the Sahara conflict. I asked him about the security, the decolonization committee. He's been there as a petitioner. There is no mention of the Polisario. Could he reflect on that? Why he just do again the cherry picking and try to distract our attention to other issues that are not linked to the issue? Why I should discuss here Mauritania or other cases? Please, could you please organize another event about, I mean, all the decolonization processes in the world, and I can talk about them. I am open to any debate. Now, again, I say that the decolonization committee is there as a UN General Assembly organ. True that it's still treating the Sahara conflict, but this goes against the UN founding texts, Article 12 of the UN Charter again. The same committee does not recognize the Polisario as a representative. And I'm sorry to hear that Isabel Lorenzo saying a legal representative. When you say, Madam, legal, you are referring to law. Could you please tell me what reference, what legal text you are making reference to here? Sorry, if we cling to scientific discourse, then we can find the common ground. If we are here to produce propagandistic speeches, I'm not the right person to do so. There is no way to accept, Samir says that there is no way to accept the UN Security Council process. From international law point of view, again, the right to self-determination is a very important right, agree. But the applications of this right has been different in the world. They have been applied 78 times. And through a referendum, it was a minority practice. True that Morocco accepted the referendum in the Nairobi summit in 1982. But when we came to apply this, to implement the referendum, it got stuck to a very big problem. That is the difficulty to identify the eligibility of the voters. And this is linked directly to the identification of who is eligible to vote. I refer you here to all the UN Security resolution stating that we need to identify the campus population. The population in the Sahara is well defined. They participate in elections democratically, and these elections have been loaded by the General Assembly, the Secretary General in his report in 2016. So these are very important things to take into account. Please, let's respect the House.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Your time is out. I have still 4 people that are inscribed. I just want to address the question that you made to me personally. As far as I have seen in all texts that I have read, I refer to Polisario as the legal representative in the UN because it's the party that's always invited to the negotiations and has also like Morocco, signed the ceasefire agreement in 1991. We had Thomas Olgerin inscribed, but he's not with us anymore. So I would like now to pass the question time to Jessica Martins.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question is to Professor Mohammed Ahmed Gain. What is the legitimacy of Morocco's claim over the Western Sahara territory once the International Court of Justice analyzed it and it was contrary to the Moroccan claims back then in 1975, I guess?
could you please give me a few seconds? I want just to use to give really scientific arguments from judges who participated in the International Court of Justice advisory opinion. This is an advisory opinion. It is not binding. It has a recommendatory nature, but there is a very important part of it that recognizes the ties between the local population and the monarchy. From the Islamic international law point of view, we have bay'ah. The bay'ah is an official recognition and of the connections between a local population and the ruling system. And interpreting this situation from a Eurocentric universalizing point of view ignores the local cultural specificities. Again, the Court of Justice had made an advisory opinion, but judges who participated in the board have pronouncements stating that the right to self-determination needs necessarily what? A consultation with the local population, with a free will consultation. Now, I refer you to the European Union Court of Justice. When Polisario appeared before the court to contest the agreements between Morocco and the European Union on the agreements, the agriculture and fishery agreements. What was the pronouncement of the European Court of Justice? I am talking here about legal pronouncement, jurisprudence. The EU Court of Justice states that Polisario has no standing. There is a lack of standing. It means that the Polisario does not have the right to appear before the court to contest any agreements between the European Court of Justice, between the European Union and Morocco. What happened after that? The European Union Commission consulted the local population to renew the agreements between Morocco and the European Union based on the pronouncement of the Court of Justice. They consulted the local population. Who was this local population? Civil society, well identified, that participates at the international level. Local elected bodies who participated in the UN Security Council led process. Of course, there is among the audience Europeans who understand the democratic practice. Democracy means the free will to choose who speaks for me. Now, the elected bodies in the Sahara are being recognized even in the UN Committee 24. They participate as spokesperson of the local population. Now, the inhabitants in the camps, can any one of you here tell me how many people are there? Can anyone here among the audience and the speakers tell me that he or she could testify a democratic practice, which is testified by the UN Secretary General in the Sahara, here, South Morocco? No. What we have is a leadership that enforces a capture of life, and enforcing one opinion, one ideology, indoctrinating this local population with falsified ideas. That's the truth that we should consider. Now, we are in front of a regional dispute. This regional dispute, there are players in the backstage who have interest. And I ask you a question: how would this conflict look like without Algeria's role? Why Algeria proposed in 2002 with the Polisario, why they proposed dividing the Sahara territory between Morocco, and why Morocco refused? Morocco accepted the referendum, but the referendum proved ineffective and invalid and not realistic, because we don't know who is in the camps. Now, there is a UN-led process by the Security Council, which means the suspension of any action by other UN organ regarding the same regional dispute. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so
Let
much.
me just, Isabel, let me just add this, which seems to be important for the rest of the debate, which is, if the direct answers are replies, we shall ask our invited speakers not to go further into other subjects, because they don't have to spend the 5 minutes time. They can be up to 5 minutes, and we have observed that in the latest replies, several issues are replied within the same question. So we would like them to stick to the direct questions. We still have a question from Daniel Smith, who had just raised their hand before. So I'm going to ask you to put it.
We have, Professor Maficiel, we have two guests that have inscribed themselves before. Daniel.
No, before Daniel Smith was one of the first to raise the hand, Isabel. I don't know if she's still with us.
Maybe she's not still with us. She's not with us anymore. No.
No, I'm
no. So I have taken count. So the next one will be, I hope I say it correctly, Mr. Zin El Abdin.
Carla, tem que dar o som.
It's good. You hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me present myself. I am Zil Abdi Al-Wali, a Moroccan Sahrawi, president of AFORES, African Forum for Studies and Research in Human Rights. Firstly, I am agree with your participant from Kenya when he say that Spain is possible of this artificial conflict, simply because this country, Spain, has the all archives that proved that Sahara is Moroccan. The reality, and asking also my participant from Kenya, where was Polisario before 73? The reality that's as a Sahrawi, my father and my grandfather and fathers of all thousands of Sahrawis like me were fighting Spain, the colonial power, as Moroccan citizens. So, and you can search in the history to find this reality. To finish, I am a Sahrawi, and Polisario don't present me. Me and like thousands of Sahrawis like me in the south province of that living in Morocco. So how they claim that he is the legitimate representative of Sahrawis? How he claimed that he is a representative that Sahrawis, or thousands of Sahrawis who are living in South Morocco, more than 80% of Sahrawis say that are Moroccan and practicing this life in this province.
Mr. Zine, may I ask you to raise the question, please?
As far as I understood, your question is to Sidi Omar, how he can say that Polisario is a legitimate representative. Is this the question?
Yes, and also I'm asking from your participant from Kenya. Mike, do you hear me? Where was Polisario before 73? Because before 73 is now thing that organization that's called Polisario, who claim he is sovereignty of Sahara.
Thank you.
So, thank you. So I don't know if Sidi Omar wants to, Dr. Sidi Omar wants to respond to this question. And but I think we can put the question to Seyna Bashir. Seyna Bashir, could you answer, please?
Carla, tem que ativar o som.
Thank you, Isabel, and I'm glad that you corrected. I think the questions should be directed to panelists and not to participants who are just asking questions to members of the panel. It's very ironic that some claim to be experts on international law and don't even know the letters and the text of international law. Zainuddin Al-Abidin Al-Wali, please just Google Resolution 3437 of November 1979 and look at paragraph 7. And and I quote, recommends to that end that the Frente Popular para la Liberación de Saga Hamra y Río de Oro, or Polisario, the representative of the people of Western Sahara. So if there is nothing else to go by, then you have an unanimous decision by the United Nations identifying the Polisario Front as the representative of the people of Western Sahara. And if the Polisario was not the representative of the people of Western Sahara as their liberation movement, then there could not have been any ceasefire agreement between the Kingdom of Morocco and the Polisario Front. And they were put they were sitting next to each other at the negotiating table, and both signed the ceasefire agreement. The Polisario Front is the liberation movement in Western Sahara, which is still occupied by Morocco, but the Sahrawi Republic, or Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, is a fully acknowledged member of the African Union, as is the Kingdom of Morocco. The Kingdom of Morocco since 2017, but the Sahrawi Republic since '82. And the reality on the ground is that you have two members of the African Union, two equal sovereign members of the African Union. The only difference is that one is occupying parts of another, and the Kingdom of Morocco is the one occupying parts of Sahrawi Republic. And there is really no questions of if and when. It's just that this is a clear case of decolonization that needs to be finalized. And if Western Sahara is being called Africa's last colony, is because all the previous colonies in Africa have been liberated, and they managed to gain their independence, and one territory remains to achieve that goal, and that's Western Sahara. And so, of course, it is natural to call it Africa's last colony because it is a fitting description. And that could change. Who knows? There is a petition by Chagos, by the Mauritius, to decolonize Chagos. So hopefully, Western Sahara will be decolonized, and soon we'll have the last colony in Africa as the Chagos archipelagos, and not Western Sahara. And the demands are very clear and very simple. As Africa's last colony, partially occupied by Morocco, its citizens oppressed on a daily basis, denied their rights under occupation. You have humanitarian situation. Yes, I live in refugee camps. I'm completely dependent on humanitarian aid, and no one chooses to be a refugee. No one, and I don't think any of these people listening to us right now would ever choose to willingly leave their country unless they were pushed by war, by oppression, by persecution, by being bombarded by white phosphorus and Nepal, and their families eradicated, literally eradicated by aerial bombardment over 16 years. And those bombs being dropped at Sahrawi civilians in between 1975 and 1991 were sponsored by France, by the US, by Saudi Arabia. So yeah, you may call the US a democracy, but US is also sponsoring Israel, which is a colonial settler apartheid state. Yes, you may call France a democracy, but France is the reason why we still have many not fully decolonized countries in Africa. And France is the cause of many repressive regimes being still in power in many of our African countries. We are discussing this decolonization case because it is relevant to Africa Day. And I feel sorry for my brother Mohammed, who did not even mention Africa in this. You are an African. You are an African, and you have to own that. You have to own your Africanness. You have to own that as Africa, we can solve our own problems.
Thank you.
Western Sahara
Thank you,
is the last
Sana.
of which.
Thank you, Sana. Let's proceed to the next question. Isabel?
Well, we have four questions. Jessica Martins already made her post one question, so she will be the last one if we have time, because we are having time restrictions now. So the next speaker will be Auguste Lança. Carla, pode-se a favor dar...
Ela só explicou que dá, o Augusto é que tem que ativar.
Olá.
Hello, yes.
Hello for everyone. I just want to put a question to Professor Mohammed Hamed Gain. I am speaking to you from Beja, the city where the great poet Al-Mutamid was born. So the links of Portugal and Morocco are very strong. But I just want to know if you don't think that this question of Morocco and Western Sahara are very similar to the case of East Timor and in Indonesia. That is our impression. So most of the people that support the struggle of Western Sahara people also have supported the struggle of East Timorese people. Don't you think these cases are very similar, Professor Mohammed? Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you very much, dear Augusto Landa, for your question. But before I answer, I would just to reflect very briefly on some of what has been raised by my sister Sunia. You said that the ceasefire has been signed by the Polisario and Morocco. That's not true. The ceasefire was signed between the MINURSO and Morocco from one side. There is no sitting on one table. And now I challenge your knowledge now to give me on the day in which they sit on a table between Morocco from one side, Polisario from one side, and they signed the agreement. The agreement has been signed from one side between the Morocco and the MINURSO, from the other side, Polisario and MINURSO. Polisario is a military group, okay, as a non-state military group from international law. Here I am speaking law, sister. I'm not speaking anything. The Polisario from international law is a non-state group that has no jurisdictional authority. This ceasefire was signed again. Go back to the agreement and you'll find that it was signed by Morocco with the MINURSO, and another side of it was signed between the MINURSO and the Polisario. For I am African. I am very African. I want to refer you to my page on my Facebook page. I have been training youth throughout Africa, in Rwanda, in Kinshasa, in Gabon, all over Africa, Nairobi 2 times, training youth on peace building. And I do believe in peace because I am president of a think tank called African Institute for Peace Building and Conflict Transformation. And also I am the Deputy Secretary General of the Pan-African Youth Union. To your knowledge, I know very well Africa, and I understand, and I am deeply convinced that African solutions should emanate from Africa. That's why without a common ground between Algeria and Morocco, this conflict will never come to an end. This is just to reflect on what you have said. About the question of Mr. Augusto. Thank you for your question. Just to answer your question, I want to refer you to a statement by the South Sudan president, who said that the Sahara conflict is different from all other conflicts. Why? If it is not different, why would the Security Council treat this conflict? Otherwise, we would keep it among the non-autonomous, the non-self-governing territories under review of the 4th Committee. The Security Council is leading a process because they know very well that there are parties to the conflict that should be brought to the table of negotiations. And this is what happened, by the way. The round tables led by Horst Kohler in Geneva 2 times, there were 4 parties to the conflict participating on equal footing. And now I want you to go back to the communiques of Horst Kohler and even the United Nations. There is no differentiation or hierarchical organization of the participants in these round tables. 4 participants, because it is a regional dispute. Now, this regional dispute, how should it be treated? There should be realism, pragmatism, compromise. Morocco has made a compromise, introducing an autonomy plan with a local government, a local parliament, a local judiciary, 3 authorities, to make some territorial arrangements that gives a middle ground and not proposing dividing the territory as Algeria and Polisario has done. That's my answer to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As said, to time restrictions, we will not have double questions from the public. So the only person that I have now that didn't spoke before is Mr. Ahmed. If you could present yourself, please, and put forward the question.
Hello.
Yes,
I am Mr. Ahmed Didi from the Sahrawi diaspora in France. My question to the representative of Morocco: how do you explain that Morocco is the only country in Africa that has no known borders, because it claims on Mauritania, Western Sahara, and part of Algeria, and territory belong to Spain, like Ceuta and Melilla? My second question: how can Morocco convince the Sahrawi of self-determination, of self-rule under an authoritarian regime, where we saw that thousands of citizens flee this day in a mass immigration to Spain? Thank you.
Mr. Ahmed, Mr. Mohamed Ahmed Gain. Professor?
Thank you very much for your question. About the territories, Morocco has very clear territories and with very open jurisdiction. Between Mauritania and Morocco, there is a crossing. There is the El Gargarat crossing point, which the Polisario tried to blockade, to block a few months ago, and the Moroccan military intervened to alleviate every threat in this crossing. So this crossing is between Morocco and Mauritania, and I refer you here to the European Union Minister of Voisinage, of the neighboring. He said that we support any work to ensure the fluidity of the traffic of persons and goods between Morocco and Algeria. And I refer you also to the communique by Russia, stating the same thing. So this intervention to remove any threat posed by the Polisario on the national security of countries of the region was from a jurisdictional authority of Morocco. And the jurisdictional authority, now who is liable? Who is liable before the United Nations mechanisms in Geneva about the southern provinces, Laayoune and the other cities? It's Morocco. We have national human rights commissions there, and Morocco introduces a report to the United Nations about all its territory. What is left east of the berm is subject to the agreement, the ceasefire agreement signed with the MINURSO. And by the way, the MINURSO is a peacekeeping mission by definition, to reflect on another point raised by Sinea. This is a peacekeeping mission by definition, which means that its main goal is to maintain peace, to keep peace in the region. So that's why it is still there. The other question, whatever I can say, if there is someone who plays the role of the victim, this discourse of victimhood is more attractive, it's more catching. But I have friends from Africa who someday came to the Sahara, to south of Morocco here. I was talking about Morocco and the Sahara, and when we came to Dakhla, to the airport of Dakhla, one of them told me, still in the airport, he told me, "Are you sure we are in the heart of this desert?" I said, "Yes, we are in the very bottom of Morocco. This is the last urban space in Morocco, deep down in the south." I said, "But how could you have this very beautiful airport? Morocco is open. Dakhla as a city is open to tourism. And there are direct flights between Dakhla and Paris and other European cities. If there is a crisis, as you are picturing it, you are displaying it, if there is a crisis, do you think that this cooperation would be carried on? sorry, I advise you, come as my guests in my house. All of you, any one of you wants to come to my house, please come to me, Muhammad Ahmed Gain. And I will take you to different parts of the Sahara, and you will discover that you have been subject to propagandistic discourses that distort the reality on the ground. It's I'm not here to play the role of the victim, but you know who is the victim? The victim is those silenced populations in the camps, those who do not benefit from the wealth, from the humanitarian aids embezzled as Olaf. This Olaf is a European organ that issued a report in 2015 stating clearly that there are embezzlements and diversions of humanitarian aids.
Professor Gain,
the Polisario lead enriched from.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
You know,
But there was a second question about the migrants, the thousands of migrants, Moroccan migrants in Ceuta. And since you have very little time, if you could please answer this question.
You know, there is an agreement between Morocco and the European Union. Morocco, of course, that's my opinion. I'm not speaking, that does not engage any governmental organization or institution. Morocco and the European Union has cooperation frameworks, including tackling the migration issues. But when there is a bilateral crisis, Morocco states every time that Morocco cannot stand as a guardian or a guard of the EU borders. If there is any infringement of these agreements between the European Union and Morocco, or between non-member states and Morocco, that does not mean that Morocco would respect this partnership while it is not respected by a member state of the European Union. Why this agreement and partnership is not respected by Spain? Simply, they hosted the Polisario leader, who is sued by the Spanish judiciary for rape of a Spanish citizen, Khadija Mahmoud, for torture and genocide. And that's what Morocco does not accept. How could you allow?
Professor, you have just reached your time. I'll pass the word to Isabel.
So thank you all for participating. I want to pass the word to Professor Maciel to give his last word. And thank you so much for participating. This conference will be online on our YouTube channel from CEOP. Thank you. Professor Maciel?
Well, nothing more to add. I just wanted to thank to all. I know that many questions were not addressed, especially those ones rising out of the intervention of our main speakers. But according to the rules of the debate, this had to be like this. We expect to have more conferences on this issue. This is a war going on, and this is not a matter of opinion. So I think, unfortunately, that in the next times we shall have more opportunities to come to this issue. Thank you to all. Thank you very much.